Welcome to Phacilitate's digital content platform. I'm here again in Miami and I'm talking to Matthew Lakeland, VP of Scientific Affairs for Traxcell. Thank you very much for joining us for this chat. I mean, my question was, what are the challenges of supply chain for advanced therapeutics today and how are we overcoming them?
Okay, that's a really big question, and the challenge for the industry itself is that the traditional model for delivering these types of therapies or traditional pharma was very much a centralized manufacturing approach, manufacturing hundreds of thousands of doses and then distributing to well-defined hubs into pharmacies and then from pharmacies to the patient. But that's not possible with cell therapy products. And certainly for autologous cell therapy products, it's a case of rather than having hundreds of thousands of doses manufactured per manufacturing run, it's one patient, one manufacturing exercise. So no, it's not just about supplying and getting the product to the patient, but it's actually managing a unique manufacturing operation for every therapy that's generated. So it actually starts with screening a patient and identifying a patient that's suitable for a particular treatment. And from that point, that's when the manufacturing actually starts, because you need to be able to demonstrate that an individual's cells have been taken, demonstrate that chain of identity and chain of custody all the way through from collecting of cellular starting material, manufacturing, and right through back to treatment. So that poses a really big challenge to the industry, because you're having to manage a whole different group of people, a whole different group of stakeholders in this production cycle. You've got to think about the collection centers themselves, whether it be apheresate, whether it be bone marrow or other cellular starting material products. How do you get those to provide the information you need to demonstrate to the regulators that these cells have been handled correctly, that you can prove that if your records say that these cells came from patient X, they were indeed donated from patient X. And then also the real challenges around product movement as well. You're not moving excipients, you're moving living starting materials, living cells. So they need to be handled incredibly carefully. They have very tight parameters and you need to meet those parameters and also demonstrate that you've met those parameters in order to produce a satisfactory product, but also convince the regulators that you've produced a satisfactory product. So in essence, you're tying together a whole group of stakeholders and people. You need to generate information to prove that the product's been handled correctly, and then also handle the cells correctly yourself. The real challenge is to collect all the information from all those different stakeholders, put it together in something that can be convincing to a regulator to demonstrate that the product has been handled correctly, but also handling the product correctly to produce these very complex therapies.
And do you think there's a future where we're going to have these automated manufacturing facilities within the hospital, essentially at the patient's bedside, or do you think it's always going to have to be transported to a central site and then transported back, or I suppose a combination of the both?
That's a real challenge to the industry, but not just to the industry, to the regulators as well. So to have localized manufacturing, you have to think about how you can control that and how you can demonstrate that a product manufactured in one particular hospital is the same as another product, bearing in mind that you might have patient-specific variability in the starting material. The challenge to the regulator is, how do you license these manufacturing facilities, and how do you make sure that they are producing these cellular therapies, complex products, to the same standard? Bearing in mind that even introducing a level of automation, you're still going to need high level of expertise to produce these cells. And how can you be sure that those expertise are the same across all those different sites? So that's a real challenge. What we've found, certainly at Traxcell, is that the majority of our customers are looking at a centralized manufacturing approach. But it's not to say perhaps in the future, maybe 10, 20 years down the line, once they fully characterize the product and the manufacturing and the way in which the cells respond to the manufacturing conditions, they may be able to think about a decentralized manufacturing strategy. But I believe for the short term, centralized manufacturing is the way forward until a lot more is understood about the cells and the factors that influence their behavior during the manufacturing process.
Okay. And so our meeting here in Miami is a global meeting. We're talking about European sites, North America, and there's a big delegation from Japan. But looking wider, and I suppose I look towards Latin America in particular, being in Miami, in terms of the infrastructure, moving these cells between sites like that, hospitals in areas that probably aren't set up for necessary advanced therapeutics, but we want to go out and treat those patients. Will that create particular challenges that we'll be looking at in 5-10 years to overcome?
I think the starting point is you look at the risk and benefit. The risk to the patient and the benefit of the patient. So you think about how you might get the therapy to the patient. So for patients who are unwell but not necessarily gravely ill, if there's such a challenge around the logistics and moving the cells safely, can you actually move the patient towards the manufacturing location? And if that's possible, well, then that might be easier to manage the risk there than having to move the starting material to centralized manufacturing and back again. It's not ideal. A lot of these patients are gravely ill, but you want to give these patient populations access to these curative therapies. And so you just have to think about different strategies depending on the local infrastructure, what's available, and really understand the risk. Take a lot of time to develop a risk assessment for the whole supply chain, the product supply, and think about different and novel ways to address those risks. And if you can do that, you can move towards developing a viable product which will treat and save an awful lot of lives.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the insight. I know it's a really critical topic. We talk a lot about the clinical development, the R&D, but when it comes to actually delivering these therapeutics to patients, a lot of things like supply chain are going to be really critical for the next 5 or 10 years. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.